The Gospel of John begins with a startling statement about Jesus: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men." The Apostle Paul echoes this idea in his letter to the disciples at Colossae, "Who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creation. For by him all things were created, that are in heaven, and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones, or dominions, or principalities, or powers, all things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things consist. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have the preeminence, for it pleased the Father that in him all the fullness should dwell." Consider some of the statements about Christ in these scriptures. He pre-existed with the Father. There was never a time when Jesus did not exist. He was with God, and at the same time he was God. Hundreds of books have been written on this concept. Our main concern here is not the theology, but the factual meaning of the statement that Jesus created and sustains existence. According to John, Jesus is the co-creator of everything that exists, both in the visible world and in the invisible, spiritual world. Not only is Jesus one of the creators, but all things rest on him, for since the creation of the world the invisible things of him, even his eternal power and Godhead, are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, so that they are without excuse. And in the 400+ years since the scientific revolution began in Western Europe, scientists have made astonishing advances in understanding the basic laws and fundamental functioning of the material world. Having the ability to understand, at least in part, how a system works is one thing, but trying to think of a God with unimaginable wisdom to come up with the laws and processes necessary for the functioning of the physical and living world can be a headache. Add to this the obvious fact that God has the power to do it all, create matter and energy, and set it all in motion in a way that leads to the end result. Nobel laureate and origins of life expert Melvin Calvin noted, "The fundamental conviction that the universe is ordered is the first and strongest principle of scientists, discovered 3,000 years ago, and first proclaimed in the Western world, namely, that the universe is governed by one God, and is not the product of the whims of many gods, each ruling his own domain according to his own laws." This monotheistic view is the historical basis of modern science. In fact, the scientific revolution began in the context of Christian Western Europe. The belief in one God led to an intellectual movement that had its roots in the pre-Renaissance era. It all started with natural philosophers like Roger Bacon, 1214 to 1292. Bacon was a Franciscan monk who some call the first scientist. To quote from Bacon's great work, "The result of all true philosophy is to obtain a knowledge of the Creator by a knowledge of the created world." In order to discover how the laws of nature worked, Bacon turned to the use of external experience, supported by instruments made mathematically exact. The discoveries of scientists over the next 7 centuries proved the depth of Bacon's knowledge. For example, Galileo Galilei, who had the most significant influence on the formation of the scientific revolution. Regarding the relationship between science and religion, Galileo wrote on this subject, "The Holy Scriptures and nature are equally begotten of God, the former as dictated by the Holy Spirit, the latter as an obedient executor of the Lord's commands." Nicholas Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, Johannes Kepler, Galileo, Robert Boyle, Isaac Newton. The list goes on. All of the founders of modern science based their search for order in nature on the belief in a single, all-knowing, all-powerful creator. Here, for example, is a quote from Newton, "Whence is it that nature does nothing in vain, and whence arises all this order and beauty?" Of course, Newton saw the source of all this order and beauty in the Creator. One of the postulates among scientists is that useful and well-accepted hypotheses are those with the broadest predictive power. By that standard, it would be safe to say that the original hypothesis of all these great scientists, that there is one creator and cornerstone of the natural world, who has made constant, mathematically exact laws, was the most fruitful and powerful hypothesis ever arrived at by scientists. King David of Israel expresses a thought similar to that expressed by Newton when he looked at the natural world. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day to day uttereth speech, and night to night sheweth knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. When Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler discovered that the Earth was not the center of the universe but moved with the planets around the Sun, they were not refuting the Bible. What they were refuting was a misinterpretation of the Bible. As mentioned, although all early scientists believed in God, in the 19th century a minority of scientists began to use science to support the belief that God does not exist. They confidently predicted that further scientific discoveries would make this conclusion more and more obvious. Later discoveries actually made the atheistic assumption less and less tenable. For example, using the atheistic assumption, by the early 20th century, many scientists had come to believe that the universe already existed. And in 1929, Edwin Hubble announced his discovery that the universe was expanding rapidly. The farther away celestial objects were from us, the faster they were moving away from us. Using this discovery, Georges Lemaitre and Alexander Friedman developed what is now known as the Big Bang theory. According to the Big Bang model, the universe was created in an insanely massive flash of light from which all the energy and matter in the universe was derived. The Big Bang model predicts that when the universe formed, it rapidly expanded and cooled. Models were used to predict that a background of microwave radiation at a temperature of just a few degrees Kelvin should fill the entire universe. When Penzias and Wilson accidentally detected this background radiation in 1963 using a microwave antenna, the Big Bang theory seemed to be confirmed. In the 1960s, the scientific community was almost unanimous in accepting that the universe was indeed created. What is astonishing about the scientific model is that when matter and energy were created, space and time were also created. If the Big Bang model is correct, and further experiments have strongly supported this view, then the universe, matter, energy, time and space itself, is a product that can only be described as a miraculous creation. To quote the world's most famous cosmologist, Stephen Hawking, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been even 1 part in 100,000 million slower, the universe would have recollapsed before it reached its present state. I think there is a clear religious meaning here. Let me remind you that there are 4 fundamental forces in nature, which are gravity, electromagnetic force, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force. The strong nuclear force is required to hold the nuclei of atoms together. According to the Big Bang model, if the value of the strong nuclear force constant were smaller than it actually is, even by a very small amount, there would be only hydrogen and nuclear fusion in the universe, and obviously there would be no life. If the value of the strong nuclear force constant were larger, there would be no hydrogen in the universe, and therefore there would be no nuclear fusion in stars, and obviously there would be no life. The same applies to the idea of the electromagnetic force. It is the force that holds electrons around atoms, and that holds molecules together. If these forces were just a little stronger, there would be no covalently bonded molecules, and there would be no life in the universe. If this force were just a little bit smaller, the complex molecules necessary to support life would immediately disintegrate. One can argue about the lucky coincidence, but the reason screams that it is not a coincidence. The fundamental forces of nature were created to maintain a stable universe in which advanced life forms can exist. And evidence of the amazing wisdom and power of the Creator is also found in chemistry. When God conceived and created the universe with its natural laws, He created quantum mechanics. In His wisdom, He made particles such as electrons behave with wave-like properties. Physicists such as Einstein, Planck, Schrödinger, Heisenberg and de Broglie discovered in the first half of the 20th century that light, contrary to common sense, acts like a wave, has the properties of wavelength, frequency, and refraction, and at the same time, as particles containing countable photons. Similarly, particles such as electrons have been found to have wave-like properties such as wavelength, diffraction. The wave nature of electrons is absolutely essential for the operation of the universe and for the maintenance of living things. Wave-like properties are required for the reactions that occur in the Sun. They are also responsible for the electronic properties of atoms. When God conceived and created the laws of nature, He simultaneously created the periodic properties of the elements, which are based on the strange wave-like behavior of electrons. For example, life would not be possible without the unique chemical properties of the element hydrogen. Without hydrogen bonding, proteins and nucleic acids would not have their amazing and beautiful structures. Hydrogen bonding is essential for the unique and essential properties of water. Advanced life forms need a solvent for their nutrients, for them to move around, and for all their vital chemical reactions to occur. Of all the millions of compounds that exist, only water has the necessary properties to support life. These properties include a fairly high boiling point combined with a light molecule, the ability to dissolve ions and covalent molecules, high heat capacity, and another unique property of water is that its solid form floats in liquid. If water did not have an extremely high heat capacity, the Earth's temperature would fluctuate by hundreds of degrees, which would make the existence of complex life forms impossible. The fact that solid ice floats in liquid water is unique among all compounds. It is also necessary to keep bodies of water from freezing completely in winter, which is also required for the existence of advanced life forms for a long time on the planet. There are a number of elements in the periodic table whose properties are unique and essential for the existence of life. Among these unique and essential elements is carbon. Carbon is the only one of the 100 elements that has the necessary properties to be an element on which the molecules of living things can be built. Only carbon forms the 4 bonds necessary to form three-dimensional molecules. Without tetravalent carbon, there would be no way to form such complex three-dimensional molecules as proteins and nucleic acids. Carbon is the only element capable of forming stable large molecules with itself and other elements. Coincidentally, the temperature range in which carbon-based compounds are not only reactive enough to carry out metabolic reactions, but also stable. The use of the anthropic principle is not an accident, but a sign of the wisdom of the Creator, which permeates the entire periodic table. When you consider the chemistry of living things, the amazing creative power and wisdom of God is revealed once again. In 1858, when Darwin published his book, The Origin of Species, the chemical basis of life was virtually unknown. The contents of the cell were completely unknown. Scientists have come a long way in this regard. Gregor Mendel discovered phenomenological genetics with its dominant and recessive genes. However, the molecular basis of heredity remained unknown until the work of Watson, Crick, and Franklin, published in 1953. These chemists discovered the famous double helix structure of DNA. DNA itself is a miracle. The structure of this macromolecule is complex and elegant. DNA stores the coded information necessary to carry out in all molecules the necessary for life absorption of food, digestion, conversion of digested molecules into useful energy for movement, for self-defense against chemical and living enemies, self-reproduction. The DNA of the simplest microorganism contains more information than the largest novel. DNA contains coded information that allows it to direct the synthesis of proteins. Proteins are the workhorse molecules that produce most of the chemical reactions in a living cell. Imagine the wisdom of the one who came up with this system. God had to create a universe in which elements such as phosphorus, nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon and oxygen would have only those properties that allow them to form molecules stable enough to exist for many years without changing. One of the amazing and beautiful facts about the DNA molecule is that it consists of a non-random sequence of 4 different nucleotides: adenine, guanine, thymine and cytosine. The order of these nucleotides is a code that enables DNA to intelligently direct protein synthesis. And if someone still insists and tries to prove that this entire ingenious system of automatic functioning of the universe was created by chance or as a result of evolution, I will give him the simplest example. Try to take each separate fragment of a computer, lay them out on the floor and wait until the computer accidentally assembles itself as a result of evolution, and also programs itself. How long do you think you will have to wait for this chance? Probably an eternity. Because no computer, even the most perfect one, can assemble and program itself. Even the most perfect mechanism needs a creator.